here's this baby, they're new to the world, they're trying to figure it out, and they're collecting all this information from their environment, and their brain is just growing exponentially in this first year. And the thing that is going to really help it grow is having meaningful relationships and having a parent that shows up as themselves and is open to learning and connecting.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I'm your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. As its title implies, Joanna Parga-Belinkie's new book, The Baby Bonding Book, Connecting with Your Newborn, is centered on the connection between the infant and the primary caregiver. The book is thoughtful and smart and practical and a pleasure to read. It really is no wonder that the American Academy of Pediatrics selected Joanna as an official spokesperson and the co-host of its flagship podcast, Pediatrics On Call. Joanna and I discuss her book and tips for parents of newborns next. Talking About Kids is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. So, why did Joanna come on Talking About Kids? After all, she has her own podcast. Well, she came on to further spread information and insights that benefit children and families. You can do your part by sharing this episode with your friends and in your professional network. And now, the interview.
I did not come from a family of doctors. My dad, his profession, he was a judge. My mom was a teacher. So my mom was always working with kids. And I thought I was going to be a veterinarian, actually. That was what I really had a passion for animals when I was younger. We grew up with a lot of dogs. One of my uncles was a breeder of Malamutes, which is this sort of like big husky type dog. So I was always around a lot of animals. I was like, I'm going to be an animal doctor. This is what I'm going to do. And then I went, to college, and I was in a liberal arts college, so a lot of exposure to different things. And I started dating someone who came from a family of all doctors. and kind of almost by accident, I got into the same studies that he got into. I started getting into organic chemistry, which is just kind of fun when you get a chance to really study it in school. And I was like, maybe I want to do people. Maybe this is really what I want to do, because I was enjoying these pre-medical classes more than I thought I would. I got really into the science. I kind of had a science adjacent major of biological anthropology, but I was into all the pre-med classes. I got them all done. I was inspired by his family. He wasn't the person I wound up marrying and having my own family with, but I think he was a very influential player in getting me excited about medicine. And then every step along the way in medicine, I kind of always thought I'd do something a little adjacent, right? Like my concentration in undergrad was biological anthropology. I was like, I'll go to med school, I'll take my MD, and I'll do public health work. So I had a lot of people doing that. And then I was like, you know what? I think I'll just keep going and do my residency, because when I was in medical school, that's when I really got taken with pediatrics and with kids and with babies in particular. And not only did I love pediatrics, I also loved doing procedures. And I remember doing my pediatrics rotation in medical school, and I was like, I really love this rotation, but I also really love procedures, like putting in IVs and intubating and doing all this. So I was like, I don't know what I want to do, because those both seem so different. And then there was a pediatrician. Her name is Dr. Blair Hammond. She's at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine. She also has a parenting center at Mount Sinai that I always recommend to people, because it's really great, and she's an amazing mentor. And Dr. Hammond sat me down and said, you're going to be a neonatologist. Because not only do you get to work with babies and little humans, but you also get to do procedures. And that did it for me. It was sort of like she was so influential, and she tied together interests of mine in medicine that seemed to be different and put them together and said, that's what you're going to do. And it was almost comforting because I had I was so lucky to have a lot of choice in what I wanted to do with my career. And I was like, oh yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And so so I am a neonatologist, a baby doctor.
Yeah.
I have 3 babies of my own that are getting bigger every day. And I'm also a lactation consultant because I really love supporting families with babies.
So having you explain your story, it explains your book a lot more. Actually, it helps me understand it. And because we're here to talk about your brand new book, the Baby Bonding Book, Connecting with Your Newborn, which is being published by the American Academy of Pediatrics, coming out on May 20th, 2025. So depending on when you hear this, it either is about to come out or it just came out. And I find your description of your path interesting because your path is in your book, Joanna. It reads that way because there is this, you do this thing throughout the book, and we're going to talk about different sections of it, but you do this thing where you go deep into the science and procedure and pull out this kind of very human directive after like exploring different areas of the science. And in particular, I was caught by what I believe is the thesis of your book. I want to see if we agree. What would you say is the overarching thesis of your book?
I think it's really about how much building a relationship matters, how much a safe, stable, nurturing relationship for your newborn sets them up for how their brain is wired and the person that they're going to become.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that so much. And what you do with your book, and the other thing I want to ask you about is clearly you made a decision about the structure of your book. But what I see you doing all the time is talking about options, talking about the science, talking about what can go wrong or what should go right, and then keep coming back to the idea of it's your connection with you, their loving, attentive caregiver, which is your phrase from your book. You could have made this book a reference manual. That is, I think, a structure of a book like this that we've seen before. You have kind of a narrative, though, through this. Why did you decide to kind of almost treat it like a story and a journey and not just something where people can jump to the section on, prenatal care or jump to the section on vitamins or jump to the section on vaccinations?
Well, I think because we live in a world now where there's a lot of references for parents, right? And there are some great pediatric books. There's other books by the AAP. Birth to Age 1 is one of them that my good friends edit and help write, and that are great reference manuals, right? Where you can pick up that book, or you could go to other American Academy of Pediatrics resources that I really like, and you can find that reference, right? And that is both great for parents, right? But also overwhelming, right? Because you get so much information from so many different sources. So who do you trust? And how can you find relatable content, right? And I think I want parents to really trust themselves. I want them to trust themselves. I want them to be able to surround themselves as parents with safe, stable, nurturing relationships so they can grow into the type of parent they're going to become by having good support to do that. And I want parents to not feel like they're alone, right? So I want them to experience the information as story because I want them to know that they're also crafting their own story with their newborn, right? And again, I wanted the information to be approachable. I wanted it to be relatable. And I wanted parents to kind of see themselves in it a little bit too, as they're growing with their baby and bonding with their baby.
Why do you think that it's so hard to get parents, especially parents of newborns, especially if it's their first one, why do you think it's so hard to get them to trust themselves?
Yeah, I think in part it's because there's so much information out there, parents think they should know it all. You know, they kind of feel like, oh, I should be an expert in this. Like, okay, I do have this reference manual about babies, so I should already know the things that I need to do for baby before they're even born, right? And the Surgeon General, the past Surgeon General in 2024 came out with this pronouncement of parents being really stressed, right? And I think a part of that is they don't feel like they're enough. You know, they feel like they always have to be more, like they have to be an expert vaccinologist, you know, to get vaccines for their baby. And I don't want parents to feel like that. I don't want them to feel alone, that they need to be everything, right? I think they don't need to have all the information and be the smartest to raise their child, right? I wanted to get back to the basics, which is that connection that you have with that child, thinking about the qualities that you want to instill in them as they grow bigger, and being able to take time out of the busy life and out of all the information we get to just be with a baby, right? And I think that is why I think all this information and noise is sometimes why parents don't think they're enough, right? But, you know, here's this baby, they're new to the world, they're trying to figure it out, you know, and they're collecting all this information from their environment, and their brain is just growing exponentially in this first year. And the thing that is going to really help it grow is having meaningful relationships and having a parent that shows up as themselves and is open to learning and connecting. And that's all they need, you know, and there's this other part of this, right? There's all this information, but there's all this product for baby too. So people think I got to buy this or that. Like I could tell you stories about my baby registries and how they evolved through my 3 kids, but you don't need to collect all this stuff. You don't need that much. You just need to have that desire and that ability to connect. And that can be the building block and the foundation for your child's whole life.
I know we are trying to get parents of newborns to trust themselves, but as your book points out, there are instances when parents make poor decisions. And one of these areas seems to be kind of at the intersection of wanting more skin contact with the child and with sleep deprivation. And I'm thinking about the stories in your book about some tragedies that occur when you sleep with the child. Instead of having that child in their own dedicated, safely engineered sleeping space. So kind of what can you tell us about the right way to approach sleep with a newborn?
So I think the things you can do to make sleep easier for you and baby, and something that's more attainable, is number one is establish routines, both for you in your own sleep hygiene and also for your infant, and start them early when the baby is young. And then be prepared with a safe sleep environment for when you're putting your baby to bed at 3 a.m. and you're disoriented because you got up and you're having to experience a baby's sleep patterns and not your normal intrinsic ones, right? And so a good, safe sleep environment, you do want the baby alone. You don't want a bed share with them, but you want them close by, right? You want them in your room where you can respond to them and be there for them, but just not in your bed. And especially because our beds today have so many pillows and blankets in them.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you have an air mattress or a water bed, you know, things that are squishy. And remember, babies have tiny airways and they don't have good head control. So if anything is blocking their face, their nose, or their mouth, it can affect their breathing. Right. And you don't want to be worried about that at night. You want to have them alone on their own sleep surface with no bedding or pillows. And you want them on their back. There's really good evidence that once we started putting babies to sleep on their back, that just helped them to sleep better and easier and breathe better. And then and we'd already talked about this when talking about alone, but you want them in the crib or a flat sleep surface that's not inclined and that's close to you, but not in the bed with you. And we call that the ABCs, if you want to remember that for your safe sleep space: alone, on their back and in a crib or their own surface. That's how you want baby to sleep. And I love the ABCs because it's an easy acronym, but the alone does feel like, oh, alone, but not really alone. You want them in the room, sharing the room with you. So you still get that experience of sleeping close to them and being there to respond to them. But you put them in an environment that is going to be the safest for them and the safest for you to get into a routine with as you're caring for a baby at night and tired.
And being close by, being present, that word that we've used, many times, and again, longtime listeners are talking about kids will know that being present just comes up over and over again. There is no substitute for being present in the life of the kid. Being present also helps you learn about the types of cries. And this isn't something else that gets covered in your book. Let's talk about the types of cries.
Yeah, and I'm a parent too, so I get it. Sometimes when your baby cries, it is the most emotional thing for you, right? It triggers you. You can have a lot of feelings about your baby crying. But if you think about babies, that's really one of their only forms of communication.
Right.
They can't talk to you. They're not making words yet. Maybe they'll start to do that, after 6 months toward a year. But this is how they're going to communicate a need. So right off the bat, every cry doesn't mean that a baby is upset with you. They probably don't have the brain processing to have that complicated a thought. But something is bothering them, right? Maybe. But that's something that's bothering them, again, isn't you. It's maybe that it's cold. Or maybe that they're in a position that they don't like, or they're hungry, or their diaper's dirty, So, and what's interesting, and there's been great studies out of UCLA. There is even an app for baby cries to download that a UCLA research team developed. And really, parents can tell by the pitch and the tone of the cry what the baby might find discomforting. Right? Yeah. And what they need addressed. But really, it's not a condemnation of your parenting. It's a baby trying to tell you about something that they need addressed. Right? Yeah. And I think that's a good reframing for parents. And I have to also put this in that as a neonatologist, which is a baby doctor, and when I'm at a delivery, I love to hear babies cry. Because that tells me that they're opening up their lungs, they're taking their first breaths, right? So cry is not a bad thing. It's a mode of communication for baby, and it's something that you can learn so you could better address their needs as they're trying to talk to you.
Well, and look, I'm an attachment guy, and we've devoted so much of talking about kids to attachment. We just had several episodes with the great Deb Pepler that were really focused on the importance of attachment over the lifespan. And at least in attachment theory, and tell me what you think about this, Joanna, in attachment theory, the recommendation is even if you get why they're crying wrong, but you respond to it, you still are helping that attachment and helping that child develop that sense of efficacy, which is so important to developing resilience over the course of a lifetime.
I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is so true, Brad. It's the trying. It's the response. Yeah. It's that, and we also have a name for that serve and return. It's the infant saying, I'm trying to communicate something, and you saying, I'm trying to figure it out, and you don't have to get it right. But you have to be there to experience it. And to have that back and forth, right? When I think of a serve and return, I think of a tennis match, and the baby you're lobbing the baby a ball maybe first, and they're not hitting it back at all, but then they're throwing you a ball, and then you're trying, and then, eventually you get to know how the other person plays, and you get to have some really good volleys back and forth. And those volleys are building that baby's brain, and they're helping them learn about the world, and they're helping the baby to feel safe, right? You were talking about resiliency and attachment. So it's priming the brain to know, like, hey, if I have an issue, someone's going to try to help me, right? And that gets back to the core of who we are as humans. We are, a species that needs each other. Right. And so it's so powerful when you're responding to that cry. And I remember, too, I had a colicky baby, my first baby, and sometimes I just couldn't make the cries go away. And so I would either have to pass the baby off if it was too stressful for me, or I'd have to live in the moment of that cry. And that is a really hard thing to do, but it is a really powerful learning experience, both for you and the baby.
Joanna, how would you like this book to be used?
I really want it to be an invitation for parents to have fun with their babies, to play with them, to explore with them, and to get to know them. And this way you are supporting them as they grow, and you are modeling what a safe, stable, nurturing relationship is, so that then when they grow up, they want to support you as well. And, you know, that's why I think it's so important for parents to really reflect on what relationships matter to them, how they can make all their relationships stronger, and how bonding with a baby is unique, right? Because it requires a certain amount of vigilance and understanding that you might not have in other relationships, but is really relationships that define us throughout our lives. And I really, really hope that parents can have just so much fun getting to really know their baby and taking the time to do that.
I'm gonna add one other use suggestion here, Joanna, to that. And by the way, that's so wonderful and what we want for all parents. But I was privileged enough to do some research. This is several years ago now, and one of the conclusions of the research was not only are parents afraid of being bad parents, especially first-time parents, right? Depending on how you measure it, they're even more afraid of being seen as a bad parent, right? And so that goes to even like whether or not they can ask for help, which, as you point out in this book, is so very, very critical that you have your network in place before that baby arrives. So what I'm going to suggest, Joanna, and you can take it to the tremendous marketing team there, is that if you have somebody in your life that is pregnant, and perhaps if they are pregnant for the first time, you read this book, because it's wonderfully written, Joanna. It is, I think it's an easy read, despite the fact that there is so much hard, good information and science in it. So you read it so that you can be supporting that pregnant person in your life. That's just a marketing suggestion from me to you, Joanna.
Thank you.
But Joanna, I want to thank you so much for being on Talking About Kids. Thank you for this book. Thank you for your commitment to pediatrics. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This was such a pleasure. I love talking about babies.
That was Joanna Parga-Belinkie. More information about Joanna and her book is at talkingaboutkids.com. And when you do visit talkingaboutkids.com, send me a note. Let me know what you think. I read every bit of feedback. The Talking About theme song is by the Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans. And the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.